All right. So, ba, ba, ba.
Originally from Nevada. I'm from Texas originally. So my connection with the death penalty is from Texas, not here, but it's obviously universally applicable. Um, I currently work at a First Amendment law firm. I'm the development director there. I moved out here when I got my law degree at Boyd. So that's my Nevada connection. Um, and yeah, I've been working in civil liberties since college. So
Nice.
you could say
What,
I was inspired at a young age.
okay. So, what part of Texas? East,
Dallas.
west?
Dallas.
Ooh,
There.
okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I have stories about Dallas.
Yeah.
I used to you used to ride with my dad. He's a trucker, and that was one of those cities we did not like riding through.
No, it's the most socioeconomically segregated city in the country, and that's intentional.
Yeah, I mean, if I recall correctly, it used to Detroit was up there. That's where all my family's from, so
Mm.
I get it. So, everyone who's currently present, including me, has been impacted by murder or the death penalty in our families. Um, so I guess we should start off with that. How have we been impacted? And I guess I'll lead since it is a joy filled conversation. Um, I know for me, my dad's brother was killed in God 2004 now. Feels like it was a lot sooner, but um, they never actually got the guy who committed the murder. Um, my dad kind of had an idea, and I spoke. We kind of had this conversation ages ago, and for me, it was hard losing my uncle who was like a second dad. But for him, he was like consumed by revenge, and like went hunting for the guy every time he was back in Detroit. Um, I think the part that got me was he realized at some point, um, if I actually found him, I would leave. He has at the time he had 5 kids, and he'd leave them all without a dad. Um, I know for me I don't know. It kind of puts what we're doing with the death penalty into perspective. It doesn't actually help heal. It doesn't bring people's family members back. It just breaks apart families more. Um, so at least for me, that's kind of my connection. I don't know who wants to jump in next.
I'll go. Um, so I have an uncle who was murdered in 2017. Um, and I mean, it was kind of crazy at the time because I was getting ready. I was finishing up with my master's degree, and just a bunch of stuff was happening like in the middle of all that. And it was really difficult because I was up here in Reno. All my family, lives down in Vegas. I'm originally from Vegas. And just like not being able to be down there, with my family was really hard. And I remember, like, for me, like, my first like thought was just, it wasn't revenge, it was just sadness that he was gone, And I think for a lot of my family, that's how it was. And I think for other members, kind of like what you said, I think revenge was probably, one of those things as well. And I think as time went on, it was just like, whatever happens to this person, it's not going to bring him back. Like, it's not going to change anything that's happened. And then later we found out that this woman, she had so many issues. Like, she was impacted since she was a little girl. She had been trafficked, just lots of abuse throughout her life. And I mean, she just had so much trauma. And so not that obviously like that doesn't warrant what she did, but it made us like see her in a different way and see like how all of these things, right? Like if she had somehow been able to get help, how would that have changed her life or changed, that moment for her and what she did. And so I think for most of my family, the death penalty just wasn't the solution. I also had a cousin earlier on in 2000 that was up for a murder charge, and out of all of the people that were involved, and he wasn't the person that murdered anyone, but the death penalty had been on the table for him. That did not happen. And I, like, during that whole trial, I hadn't even thought about, like, I didn't even know that was, something that happened until like now later. But I was like, I could have been, we could have been a family who had been impacted even differently, on the other side of that. So yeah, that's kind of, those are the things that have kind of impacted me.
Okay. I think Nancy said this ages ago. The trauma doesn't excuse the actions, but it does explain them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it just shows, right, like how we need to be putting mental health first, and how people that have those traumas, need to be getting the help that they need. So yeah.
All right, Miss Heather, would you like to
Sure. So I'm on the other side. So in 1999, I was 8 years old, and basically found out that I had a biological father, that my mom's husband was actually my adoptive father, and that my biological father was on death row in Huntsville, Texas, Huntsville Maximum Security Prison. And my mom had a really tough decision to make. It was either tell your 8-year-old daughter like this news that's like literally going to bring her entire world crashing down, or don't tell her, wait until she's an adult, and then she holds it against you forever that she never got the chance to meet her dad before he died. Like, there's no right answer. So my mom decided that she would rather let me have that information now and process it now than later in life. And I think that was the right decision. But, I had to become an adult at 8 years old. So for me, the experience was completely alien. I mean, I'm very outgoing, bubbly. My family is really like that. So to just be introduced into this environment that there's armed guards all around me, I can't even like give my dad a hug. Like, I asked them if I could, they said no. So I had to like talk to him on a phone through, plastic or glass or whatever that was. So, I did get to talk to him once before he was executed, but I never got to hug him, and I never got to really make that bond. Um, I remember he was just a normal guy. He seemed really remorseful. He was severely mentally ill, which his ex-wife and ex-girlfriends all testified to. It didn't matter. It's Texas. The victim's family did not want the death penalty because the man that was murdered had a grown daughter who was in her 30s. So she didn't want to take someone else's father away from them. Mm. But obviously, in a state like Texas, it's like a point of pride for them. So as far as I'm concerned, what I recall is that he didn't appeal. So it was very quick. He was executed. The last thing he saw was my stuffed Tweety bird against the glass from when I was a baby, the toy that I had with me. So, that's probably the last thing that he was thinking. I also just made the realization that he was my age when they murdered him. I'm 30 years old. I have no idea what I'm doing in life. And to make a final judgment on someone who had been on the street since age 15, severely abused by his parents, severely mentally ill, multiple personalities, schizophrenia, was on PCP when the crime happened, like 1,000 different reasons why he shouldn't do it, right? But that one instant of, revenge it's just like addictive to people. Like back in the day, they would attend public hangings and lynchings, and it's the same thing now in my eyes. The enthusiasm is what's really disgusting to me about it. So obviously, I didn't really get a chance to get to know him very, very much. What I really took from meeting him was that we had the same eyes, and I kind of
older when it happened. He wasn't a kid, but for him, it was still traumatizing, in a different way, though.
Yeah, it's it's one of those things where sometimes I wonder if it would have been harder if he had been alive, because it would have been this relationship that I would have had to maintain for the rest of my life. And sometimes it seems almost easier. But you know what? What's easy is not always right. And I feel like this is just a solution that they can wash their hands of it and be done with it. But that's not right. And yeah, it would have been hard for me, but I would have had a chance at getting to know him. He would have had a chance at redemption. And we never got that chance.
So Heather, so your experience, I think, is one that's virtually never spoken about in regards to criminal justice issues, death penalty. What I'm guessing, I think you kind of went over it, but why do you think those stories from folk who are the families of the condemned, for lack of a better word, is important to be shared?
Right. Well, if you humanize us, then people don't want you to execute people anymore. It's really that simple. It's like when you hear casualties in war. It's people dying. It's not troops, it's human beings, right? But it's just one more step removed from being human, right? So I really think that's what it is that they don't want to acknowledge that in terms of utility, they're just putting more harm into the world. It just makes it easier, and people really don't want to face it. And honestly, I would be surprised even now if the legislature really acknowledged that part at all. Everything I've been seeing is, fiscal reasons, which is gross that you even have to go for that. But did you guys know that they had to stop executions in this state because the chamber was not ADA compliant?
Yep, I am aware. And
they had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to make a torture chamber ADA compliant.
Yeah, I remember Mark told me that when I first started, and I was like, come again? That doesn't... Yeah.
It's there is no logical reason why, and I would hope that especially the prosecutors and the legislature would agree that logically there's no reason. So hopefully we'll be able to count on them.
I'm not going to say anything bad because we need their votes.
Well, I think that people, I've noticed that when people have something that affects them directly, that's when their attitudes change. Yeah. And I think that my voice or my kind of voice have ever been amplified. So if now they cannot ignore, that might change some people's opinions because they've literally never had to consider that point of view before. So that's why I'm really hoping to testify so that they can't ignore it. They have to acknowledge. And when they vote, they have to think of me. And every child.
Having a person in front of you makes it real. Yeah.
So Monique, question for you, and this is kind of based off of your experience as a social worker and as an impacted person. How do you cope with that urge for vengeance? So you actually start healing, and it's not just let's hang that person.
Yeah. I can speak for me personally. It was a lot of grief, right? So it wasn't just like, and everyone deals with grief differently. I want to say that off the bat. Like, for some people, it's, anger's just like huge, right? And it's just radiating and they're just frustrated and mad all the time. And for other people, it's just like a deep depression, And also grief isn't like this like linear thing, you know, that starts and ends. It's circular, you know, you can be at anywhere, any point in time, it changes. I think for me, because like I said, there was just so much happening in that time in my life. And so a lot of what I was feeling, I was putting into, you know, my work for others, you know, and becoming a social worker, and at the work I was doing. I think I was doing work at the legislature at that time. And a lot of it for me, I think, was trying to understand like why. So I liked, it was helpful for me to understand this person's story. Like as the, you know, as the trial started and things started to happen, it was helpful for me to see her as a person. Like I wanted to see, I think they had like a video from the hotel that they had walked out through, and I wanted to see all of that. I wanted to understand this person, and not necessarily like, for me, it wasn't rage. It was just like, I need this to make sense. And not that it ever made sense, but I think in trying to do that, kind of like what you were saying, Heather, it humanized her for me. It helped me to understand, like, well, I will never understand what's going through her head, but it helped me to understand like, oh, like this is not just, you know, a person that was just like, I'm out to like hurt someone. This is a person that, you know, was really troubled, and like in a minute just had this split decision, and like this horrible thing happened. But it wasn't, from what I understand or from what I see now, it wasn't like this thing that, you know, she had like planned and plotted and stuff like that. And I'm sure, you know, for other folks who have been on the end where I am, you know, it's different for everyone. You know, maybe it, you know, there was murders that have been meditated. I get that. That just wasn't the case in this situation. And I think learning about her family, learning about her life, and understanding, to me, it made her more as a person, as a human. And for me, it was like, this person needs help. Like she doesn't, like killing her, first of all, is not going to bring my uncle back. And it also is not going to solve anything. It's not going to change anything. If anything, it just takes her away from her family. So for me, that's kind of like how I processed.
Yeah, I don't want to put myself in it too much, but honestly, when my uncle died, I was like 7, 8. So it was like, you know, you registered it, I grieved, and then I just kind of buried it deep down and then didn't look at it for years. And I was talking to my dad about it a couple years ago. And that was part of the process to trying to understand, because it was like, it was a person I had met. It was one of my cousins who had killed him. And it was like, or at least, and it was like, I need you to take up, like, we need to go back 50 steps. How did this happen?
Yeah.
And you know, for me at least, it didn't make it better, but I at least kind of understood.
Yeah. I think, and like I said, it's different for everyone, but I think trying, right, to put myself in her shoes and trying to understand her life, that was helpful for me. I know for other people, that's not helpful, right? Like they just, you know, they have some work to do, whether or not it's vengeance or whatever it is, you know, they probably have some work to do on their own. And I think therapy is a great way, you know, to work through some of that frustration and some of that, you know, like grief and just like hurt, right? Like pain that folks feel through any situation when someone they love that's close to them passes. But yeah.
So I think Heather, you touched on this. So normally, and this was true in Virginia and a lot of other places that looked at abolition recently. So like Colorado, Washington, California, like the cost argument was the one that was most compelling to people for some reason.
Yeah.
For some reason.
Hey, I know for me, I think it was like when I first started with the coalition, I understood that like there's some moral issues with the death penalty. And I looked at the cost, I was like, all right, so this is indefensible. I thought, hey, if it's like, I think this feels wrong, and they're like, I think this feels right, we can disagree. But it's like, we can't spend $500,000 so you can feel better for no tangible result.
Well, I do just want to point out one thing, because it is true that it is a moral argument. And when you think of it from a legal perspective, you could think of Eighth Amendment and other things like that, but there doesn't have to be something explicit or even implied in the Constitution for it to be wrong. And the example I would think of is Brown versus Board. It was unanimous 9-0. And if you really read the decision, it was dignity. It was argued that people deserve dignity. It wasn't, it didn't have like the extensive equal protection claims and things like that. But they understood that like some things are just above what we already have, right? Like in terms of the law. Sometimes like you just have to be a moral person, and children's dignity in school matters, and people's lives matter. Everyone has dignity. So I think like people just need to be reminded, like, this can be outlawed just for being immoral. People don't want to acknowledge that, but in the past we've done that, and you can justify it with cruel and unusual punishment, things like that, but you don't even need to.
And I'm not going to name any names. I think a lot of that comes down to like, we don't look at people who commit crimes as people anymore. We look at them as a criminal. Like you get a new category of human. God
forbid you ever act on an impulse and make a really bad decision in the heat of the moment and are forever condemned. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Especially someone that's mentally ill and doesn't have the state of mind and judgment that I would have in that situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think most of us, I think Monique, you're the oldest one here. But we all grew up in kind of that tough on crime period, at least the back half of it. And that's kind of informed a lot of criminal justice policy that like affected, my family and kind of my upbringing. Do you guys see that starting to change, where we're not looking at it as punishment for punishment's sake, but hey, like prisons are here for a purpose, and it's not to be a warehouse for poor people?
I will say, I think we are just being more aware of these things now. So I'm thinking of like, recent documentaries like 13 or things like that, those things weren't around. We had America's Most Wanted, like when I was a kid, and we had Cops when I was a kid, and you're like watching and you're like, oh, like cops slamming people to the ground and like, and I look at that stuff now, I'm like, oh my God, like that's incredibly violent. And so I think people are just now having to think more about it, like what that really means. Like is the prison system, is it reforming people, or is it just like hurting people, And so I think, weirdly, I don't think people really ever thought about it like before, like earlier, I just, which is, awful, but I just don't think we had just, and especially now with not that racial injustice has just started, but again, I think those things have drawn more attention as well to the criminal justice system. So
yeah, First of all, like this, obviously my perspective is just my experience, but absolutely far and away the number one reason to get rid of the death penalty, other than it's immoral, is that it's super racist
Mhm.
and is just an extension of antebellum times. I mean, yeah, it's pretty, the new Jim Crow lays it out pretty clearly about modern policing in prison and how you can all tie it back to pre-slavery. So yeah, I do want to for sure acknowledge that, and that alone should be reason enough. But as we've seen, it's never just enough to have one. I would say though that unless drug prohibition ends in this country, the prison attitudes won't change because they only exist because of the war on drugs, and it's to exploit cheap labor.
Yeah.
So as you have more, if you were to end the federal prohibition on marijuana, that would take care of 75% right there, right? So attitudes on drugs are changing, but look at the pushback that you're seeing. I mean, look at the new voting, right? The voting restrictions they're trying to pass in Georgia. I mean, they're fighting back, right? They're gonna exert whatever power they have to make sure that these policies stay in place, that they can continue to exploit Black and brown people for cheap labor and murder them. So I'm hopeful that this is definitely like on people's conscience because of books like The New Jim Crow, but it takes like civic engagement and action to really change. So people need to, get up off the couch and actually go to protests and write their senators and Congress people.
So, I've actually seen, and I think you guys were like, it's all bad. Recently, there was a bill that passed, this committee hearing that would raise the minimum wage for prisoners in Nevada from something like depending on the job, it was like 50 cents to $1 up to state minimum wage at the minimum. And everyone thought it was going to be a huge uphill battle to get this passed. And it ended up sailing through with like bipartisan support from basically everyone there. And I don't know if that'll be indicative of kind of like where our state is when it comes to criminal justice reform. I think though there's a bright spot in Nevada, at least. A lot of states are going backwards, but I see, at least with the bills that were introduced recently, it seems like we're making some baby steps forward. Like we're not using slave labor anymore. So,
Yeah, it's just crazy. I think, I think we're like, gosh, when I think of Nevada, I think of us being like so divided with Vegas and Reno, and then you have the rural areas, and so that's always been, I think that's always been like our divide. But I also feel like, especially the last couple of years, that people have been stepping up like more, with kind of like what you said, with these new bills that are coming out. So I don't know. We'll see.
All right. So Heather, it looked like you had something to say, but you were keeping it in.
Yeah. Nevada, it's a libertarian state. So in theory, a lot of conservatives in the state especially should be against the government being able to kill whoever they want. I mean, that's just like civil liberties 101. So it'll be interesting to see if there is, conservative support as well. But what I was going to say is that I think the way to win over the people that might be sitting on the fence is the same strategy that you won